we all have at least once made fun of Disney for doing their simple titles. But did you know that all these simple titles is actually because of The Princess and the Frog? Even though nowadays is considered to be a beloved Disney classic, it didn't really do that great at the box office when it was released back in December of 2009. Disney's marketing team have done some research and they have confirmed that it was actually due to the fact that princess is in the title. I mean, The Princess and the Frog was already a mouthful, but the big reason is due to the fact that having the word princess makes a lot of people think that this movie would be girls only. So in order to fix that with their future princess films, they decided to go and completely change their title so that they would be both short and especially gender neutral. This is why Disney would go and change Rapunzel into Tangled, the Bear and the Bow into Brave, and the Snow Queen into Frozen. The result turned out to be way better at the box office, and it taught Disney a lesson that when it comes to titles, the simpler the better. If you're a major Disney fan, then you already know who is Figment for the classic Epcot attraction Journey into Imagination. And you've probably heard that he's going to star in his own movie from the writers of Detective Pikachu. But did you know that Figment has already appeared in a couple of movies before? He was first seen in Pixar's Inside Out, where he was in a picture frame close to the train of thought. He then appeared in Toy Story 4, where he was on a sign in one of the carnival games. Oh, and as an added bonus, a Figment doll made a cameo in the 4th season of Stranger Things. So if I may cap this off in Figment's voice, remember, if you see a purple dragon in something Disney related, don't worry about it. It's only a figment of your imagination. Seth Green did a lot of cool things over the years. He was the voice of Chris Griffin from Family Guy, and he is the co-creator of Robot Chicken. But did you also know that Seth gave us a very good reason why you should never work on a project with NFTs? You see, Green is a major NFT fanboy, and he actually created an entire series in order to devote his love for NFTs. The show is called White Horse Tavern, and it's a comedy set in a bar where live-action actors and animated NFT characters mix and mingle. However, one day, there was a thief that managed to steal some of Seth Green's NFTs, one of which just so happens to also be the main character of White Horse Tavern. Which is a massive problem because according to NFT rules, he who owns the NFTs also owns the complete rights of it. Thus leading to the serious problem that Seth Green can no longer work on a show because he doesn't own the rights to his lead character. So because there are no government regulations in regards to cryptocurrency, the only way that Seth Green was able to solve the problem was by buying back the NFTs from the thief for over $250,000. And I am certain that this is not going to be the last time that this incident will happen to an NFT project. And so the moral of this story is that when it comes to NFT apes, there's guaranteed to be someone who will make a monkey out of you. Hey, remember El Macho from Despicable Me 2? Well, believe it or not, he was almost voiced by Al Pacino. It went pretty well when the filmmakers worked with Pacino, but sadly, Al ended up leaving the project due to creative differences. Now I know this happens all the time in Hollywood, but this ended up causing a major problem for the production, especially when not only Al Pacino recorded all of his lines already, but also the animation on El Macho was already fully done. So at the last minute, they brought in Benjamin Bratt, whom they actually considered before Pacino, and not only did he do an incredible job filling in for Al Pacino, but he also did great making it his own character. By the way, am I the only one that finds it funny that we actually have two Mexican-themed twist villains in a mainstream animated feature, both voiced by Benjamin Bratt? They're both awesome, but it's worth mentioning the coincidence. We all know the 5 beloved emotions of Inside Out. Joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear all work together to make sure that Riley has a good life. But did you know that there was going to be plenty more emotions living inside Riley's head? During development, the team at Pixar thought about over 20 different emotions to turn into characters for the feature. Some would have more antagonistic roles such as pride, envy, greed, and gloom. Some reflect the more negative emotions such as guilt, ennui, shame, and embarrassment. And some emotions were about as optimistic as joy such as love, hope, and schadenfreude. But ultimately, in order to make things easier for both the Pixar team and for the story, they decided to settle with just 5 characters that would work in Riley's head. However, keep in mind that while these characters didn't make it in the film, that doesn't mean it could be the last that we will ever see them. Considering that Disney has announced that there will be an Inside Out 2 for 2024, you never know which emotions might get a second chance. Then again, considering that the plot will be about Riley being a teenager, let's just say that the emotions will become very unpredictable. At long last, one of the masters of stop motion, Henry Selick, is back with a brand new movie. But you might be wondering, where did he go after all these years? Especially when his last movie, Coraline, was released way back in 2009. Well, a good chunk of that time was creating Wendell and Wild, but beforehand, he was about to make a stop motion animated feature at Pixar. Yes, that Pixar. And yes, Pixar was about to make a stop motion animated feature. The movie was called The Shadow King, and it was about a boy with weirdly long fingers who was able to bring to life shadow puppets so that they could go and stop evil shadow monsters. So why did this movie never happen? Well, 2 words: John Lasseter. Just like his hugs, John kept on meddling the production without Henry's consent to the point that the movie became an absolute mess. And sadly, because of that, along with stop-motion films like Frankenweenie and Paranorman not doing well at the box office, Disney decided to pull the plug on it in 2012 because they thought that the movie was just too weird. It really is too bad because judging by what we have seen with the images and the animation tests that are posted online, we really could have had something special. It's too bad that John can never keep his hands to himself. Which, come to think of it, that's very on brand of him to do so. You may have heard of me talk about Caillou before, and if you have seen this video, then you have definitely heard me talk about Caillou before. So have you ever wondered why Caillou is bald in the first place? No, it has nothing to do with the fact that his name is French for pebble, and it definitely has nothing to do with cancer. Besides, I know some of you think that because it's wishful thinking. No, the true reason why Caillou is bald is because that's the only way that he could stand out from the crowd. You see, when Caillou was created back in 1989, they decided to make him bald so that even the youngest of viewers can actually spot him from the crowd if ever there's a situation that Caillou would be surrounded by children, like if he were in school or something. All the kids have to do is just point at the bald one, and there they can actually find Caillou. Then again, considering how Caillou has become so popular, there is another way to identify him from all the other children. All you have to do is find a little boy who is throwing a temper tantrum, and his parents ain't doing jack all about it! We all know Marvel today as one of the greatest cinematic titans. Every year, we always see them dominate the box office with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But did you know that there was a time when Marvel dominated television animation? Back in the 1980s and even some of the 1990s, Marvel expanded the company with Marvel Productions. And while they have touched upon a few specials and movies, the main thing that they would do is animated TV shows. Of course, they have made some based on their comics, including Spider-Man, Hulk, and X-Men, but what they were more well known for was actually their collaborations with Hasbro, to which they would create some of the most notable shows that would define the 1980s. These shows include G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, Jem and the Holograms, and Transformers. But I didn't even tell you the craziest part. Do you know what's the most popular animated series ever created by Marvel Productions? Muppet Babies. Yes, Marvel was responsible for creating the original Muppet Babies with Jim Henson. Maybe this will be a bit of a stretch, but I gotta ask. When are we gonna see the MCU debut of the Muppet Babies? For the first time ever, the legendary home media distribution company Criterion is including a Disney film to their collection with Pixar's WALL-E. This is a moment that cartoon fans are celebrating because it's actually extremely rare for Criterion to include an animated film in their collection. The first time they ever did so was back in 1989 during their early years when they included Akira into their collection. It wouldn't be until 25 years later when they included their second animated feature with Wes Anderson's Fantastic Mr. Fox. And at that point, it almost seemed like they would include an animated film to their list once a year. Because the year after that, they would include Watership Down, and the year after that, they would include Fantastic Planet. But then after that, that's it! The company adds several new titles every month into their collection, and yet throughout their entire history, only 4 movies are actually animated. But hopefully things can change now that they included WALL-E into their list. Not just for animated films, but also for the possibility of including more Disney films as well. Here's hoping that this could potentially mean that we'll get to see the Criterion release of Fantasia. One of the most fascinating Disney characters that not many people talk about is John Silver from Treasure Planet. Yes, he's a ruthless pirate who's also the father that Jim Hawkins never had, but that's not what I'm talking about. He's a 2D character animated by Glenn Keane with computer animated cyber parts, and the effect works surprisingly well. But Disney wouldn't have done that if they weren't fully sure that it worked in the first place. In order to experiment with the effect, the team at Disney decided to give one of the cyber parts to another Disney pirate, Captain Hook from Peter Pan. They took one of his old animations and placed a cyber arm on top of it. Not only is it to see if the arm can move exactly like in the animation, but also if the effect makes it look like Captain Hook actually does have a cyber arm. And as a result, well, I don't know about you, but I would be down to see a steampunk version of Peter Pan.
You will go ashore, pick up Tinkerbell, and bring her to me.
In case you haven't heard, Strange World has now become Disney Animation's biggest box office bomb in recent years. Reports have stated that Disney might lose $100 million because of it, maybe even more. But did you know that Strange World is far from the first box office bomb that Disney Animation faced? Some of which you might be surprised to hear, and of course they're all for various reasons. The first box office bomb from Disney was actually back in 1940 with Pinocchio, followed by immediately afterwards Fantasia, and I'll say now the sequel also bombed as well. Then there was Bambi, Alice in Wonderland, Sleeping Beauty. Then after Walt Disney's death, there was The Black Cauldron, The Rescuers Down Under. Then Disney lost so much money on Atlantis: The Lost Empire, Treasure Planet, and Home on the Range. Not only that, but some were not well received by critics and audiences during their initial release, like Fantasia and Alice. However, as years and decades have passed, not only are many of these movies are considered some of the greatest from Disney Animation, but they're now considered some of the greatest movies of all time. And if not that, then there's a very good chance that they would go on to have a massive cult following. Moral of this story? Maybe they bombed on their debut, but that just means that their time to shine hasn't arrived yet. So Guillermo del Toro finally managed to release his adaptation of Pinocchio, and it went through quite a journey in order to become real. And I'm not talking about the Pinocchio in the movie, I literally mean the movie itself. You see, this actually all started back in 2008 when Guillermo del Toro first announced of a stop-motion animated adaptation of Pinocchio. He also noted that it would be a darker adaptation as it would be set in 1930s fascist Italy. Following afterwards, Guillermo would give small updates about the movie, including concept art and who would be involved, but for several years the movie kept being locked in development hell. Why? Because there was no studio that was willing to give Del Toro the money in order to bring the movie to life. Someone even suggested to change the movie into a 2D animated film so that the budget would be cheaper, but Del Toro was determined to make the movie in stop motion. It wasn't until in 2018, a whole decade after it was first announced, that Netflix stepped in and granted Del Toro's wish with the money that he needs in order to fully produce the feature. And now that the movie is finally coming to life, I must say that the making of the film sounds as interesting as the movie itself. It's the story of something that went through great lengths in order to become real, just like Pinocchio. It's already been 40 years since the release of The Dark Crystal, and to this day, many people say that it's Jim Henson's greatest non-Muppet related work. But did you know that the movie almost had an animated sequel? Back when they were making the first film, Jim Henson, along with screenwriter David Odell, were thinking about ideas of what would happen if they would create a sequel. Then, 25 years later in the mid-2000s, Odell and his wife decided to be a little more serious about that sequel idea and decided to create a first draft script in which they titled it The Power of the Dark Crystal. However, instead of having it with complex puppets and intricate sets, they decided that The Power of the Dark Crystal would be an animated sequel. They even hired Samurai Jack creator Genndy Tartakovsky to be the director, and bring on board the animation studio that he was leading, Orphanage Animation. On a side note, Orphanage Animation did not last long as a studio, and the only thing that they and Genndy were able to create was Symbionic Titan. But anyways, back onto The Power of the Dark Crystal. Sadly, that was the closest they got to actually making the movie. Following afterwards, the only updates that it ever gotten was the fact that the production was kept on being delayed, until inevitably the Jim Henson Company decided to just pull the plug and cancel the project. However, that did not mean that they threw away that script. In 2017, Odell's script was turned into a 12-part comic series. Sure, it's no action-packed Genndy Tartakovsky movie, but at least it's something. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to go through the holidays without at least watching one adaptation of A Christmas Carol. But did you know as of 2022, there are a total of 18 animated adaptations of the story? And keep in mind, this is only counting the movies and the specials. This doesn't even count the numerous of live action versions, or any of the versions that are just episodes from a show. Some of these adaptations are more straightforward, including the 1971 Oscar-winning special by Richard Williams, the 2009 motion capture movie where Jim Carrey plays Scrooge and all the ghosts, and they can be as recent as the 2022 Netflix musical. But what could be considered some of the most recognizable versions are the ones that feature famous characters. These include, of course, Mickey Mouse with Mickey's Christmas Carol, the Sony version of the Smurfs, the Flintstones, the Looney Tunes, who did it twice, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and Mr. Magoo, which the latter is not only the first ever animated adaptation of A Christmas Carol, but it is also the first ever animated Christmas TV special. Happy holidays, everyone! It wasn't easy for the team at Disney to name the 7 dwarves in Snow White. In fact, during development, they thought about around 50 names that would potentially encompass the personalities of each dwarf. There was one, however, that was actually very close to making it in the final film, but he just so happened to also be one of the worst ones that they could ever think of. And who would that problematic dwarf be? Meet Daffy! And yes, his name reflects exactly what you think he is. In the film, he would have been one of the more comedic dwarfs where his shtick was that he had very bad hearing. Every time the dwarves would tell him to do something, his poor hearing would cause him to do something completely different but only sounds a bit similar to what they actually said. This would also cause Daffy to be in arguments with Grumpy a lot because of either something that he completely misunderstood, or he can't stop asking him, "What? What did he say?" But ultimately, when it was time to finally settle who the 7 dwarves would be for the film, Daffy ultimately got cut out, and I may not have any confirmation about this, but based on concept art that features Daffy, it seems most likely that he might have been replaced by Sneezy. Maybe they didn't know it back then, but Disney didn't dodge a bullet. They dodged a cannonball by cutting him out. After more than 25 years, Ash's adventures in the Pokemon anime has finally come to an end. He finally became a Pokemon master and the very best that no one ever was. So it's only fitting that his journey alongside Pikachu concludes on a happy note like that. But did you know that Pikachu was not the first choice for Ash's first Pokemon? Way back in the franchise's beginnings in the late 1990s, when they started to expand outside of the video games, the creators were thinking that the main Pokemon star should be Clefairy. No, it's not any of the starters. It's the Pokemon with a connection to the moon that they thought would be their big star. In fact, they tried that out in the original manga, where they made Clefairy the protagonist's main Pokemon in order to make things more engaging for the reader. However, when it was time to start developing the anime, they decided to switch things around for the main Pokemon and decided to give Pikachu the leading role. The reason for the switch is because the marketers believed that Pikachu would be more appealing to girls as much as he would be appealing to boys. He looks more like a common household pet more so than Clefairy, and the fact that he is yellow, which makes him a whole lot easier to recognize. And since then, Pikachu's popularity became so big that he earned the nickname of the Japanese Mickey Mouse. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but sometimes the right choice of color can help you stand out. Believe me, I know. I think it's safe to say now that the most groundbreaking animated feature in recent years is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Not only did it manage to grab its legendary status faster than most other movies out there, but it also inspired many others in order to be a lot more stylistic with their computer animation. One of them being DreamWorks Animation. In fact, in 2022, both animated features that they released that year had their animation be inspired by the style of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which are The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. But of course, Spider-Verse wasn't the only source of inspiration for their style. Coincidentally, they both also have some anime influence, where The Bad Guys was also inspired by Lupin III, and The Last Wish was also inspired by Akira. On a side note, and another coincidence, both these movies also had someone working on the film who was a key player in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. The composer of The Bad Guys was Daniel Pemberton, and before being replaced by Joel Crawford, one of the Spider-Verse directors, Bob Persichetti, took the helm of The Last Wish. Guess Spider-Verse made a far greater impact in the industry than just being an amazing film. You all remember this meme, right?
Father, when can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
Well, believe it or not, it is the 1-year anniversary of that Pinocchio meme. But how the fridge did this random Pinocchio movie ended up becoming so popular in the first place? Well, it actually happened on social media when a YouTuber uploaded a clip from the trailer after talking about it on his podcast, commenting how Pauly Shore's performance was unintentionally funny in that clip. However, that little clip ended up becoming much more popular than people expected as people kept on sharing it and the clip became a lot more viral. Especially on Twitter where it gathered millions of views and almost 200,000 likes. Of course, the American distributor of the film, Lionsgate, started to notice the viral nature of that clip from their trailer. And so they decided to carry that clip onto TikTok, and that's where it became the meme that we all know today. How do I know all this? Because that YouTuber who uploaded the clip in the first place was me! Out of all the years that I've been on the internet, never did I expect that I would take a random movie like Pinocchio: A True Story and turn that into a phenomenon. We all know Mel Blanc as one of the greatest voice actors of all time thanks to his legendary work with the Looney Tunes. But did you know that he also did a handful of voices for Disney? The first voice that he did for Disney was Gideon from Pinocchio. And yes, Gideon was originally supposed to talk. But eventually, the team at Disney decided to make him mute, and all of Mel's recordings ended up getting scrapped. The only thing that was left in the final film was just a single hiccup. But hold on, that's not all. Yes, there technically was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where he reprised his Looney Tunes voices for the final time, but that's not the one that I want to talk about. There is another Disney project where Mel Blanc was a lot more prominent than in Pinocchio. And that is the classic Disney attraction in which you can find at Walt Disney World right now, the Carousel of Progress, where he is the voice of Cousin Orville.
No privacy at all around this place.
Sorry, Orville.
So I just saw Pixar's Cars recently, and it was the kind of movie that the more you think about its concept, the more it's weird. And to show you what I mean, here are 5 disturbing facts about Pixar's Cars. In a couple of instances, Lightning McQueen sticks out his tongue. And if cars can have a tongue, then they probably also have internal organs as well. When McQueen enters the courtroom, Fillmore and Sarge call him a fascist and a commie respectively, which means that even in the Cars universe, fascism and communism exist. Not only that, but there is also a god in this universe, and they call them the Manufacturer. On his way to California, Mac passes by a truck stop in which it advertises that it has convertible waitresses. And since the place is actually called the Top-Down Truck Stop, that means that the waitresses are actually topless. McQueen's sponsor, Rusty's, is a bumper ointment, which makes it the car equivalent of Preparation H, which means that even cars can get hemorrhages. Just remember that when someone tells you to not think too much about a cartoon, they just want to protect you from thinking about stuff like that. I never thought we would start 2023 off with the downfall of one of the most influential creators in adult animation. Ever since he was charged for domestic abuse, Justin Roiland was fired from everything, including Adult Swim and Hulu. Since then, people would argue regarding the recent creative contributions Roiland has done in his shows, especially for Rick and Morty. So, do shows like Rick and Morty need Justin Roiland nowadays? And the answer to that is not really, no. According to multiple people who worked or are working on Rick and Morty, they said that Roiland did contribute a lot during the beginning, and was very collaborative with his co-creator Dan Harmon. But then, when Rick and Morty was proven to be a hit and got renewed for a season 2, Dan Harmon decided to take the show a little more seriously and brought on board some of his community people to work on the story. After that move, Roiland's interest in working on the show significantly plummeted since they wouldn't let him work in his crazy edgelord way. To which, from season 3 onward, the creative contribution from Roiland, either as a writer or a show creator, pretty much became non-existent. In fact, it would be rare for Roiland to actually show up at the studio. And when he does, it's usually to go and give a studio tour for a celebrity, or to just completely goof off. In fact, the people who worked on Rick and Morty actually said that they get more done when Justin Roiland is not there. As for his contribution as the voice of some of these characters, even for that, he barely shows up at the studio. Most of the lines that he records for his series were done at home. And of course, the same can be said for his other shows like Solar Opposites and Koala Man, where most of the people who worked on that series have never even met Justin Roiland, not even through Zoom. So not only did Justin Roiland not contribute to anything creatively on shows like Rick and Morty for years, but he reduced himself into a problematic voice actor that just needed to go. Back in the 1980s, one of the biggest animated shows, or even one of the biggest shows ever on television, was Muppet Babies. And a signature trait of the series was that the babies would use their imagination to explore live-action worlds, rather it be clips from stock footage, television, or even from popular movies. To which I can imagine with the copyright issues is why we have yet to see the original Muppet Babies series on Disney+. But with that said, did you know that one of them they managed to slip in was an X-rated movie? Specifically, the 1974 X-rated parody, Flesh Gordon. And not only did they slip in a clip from that film in Muppet Babies, they did so twice. One time was in the episode Babes in Troyland, and the other was in the series finale 8 Flags Over the Nursery. But of course, they didn't show anything explicit in the show. In fact, the only thing that they showed from that movie was the big stop-motion monster from the feature's climax. But still though, you can't help but wonder, how did the babies manage to slip in an X-rated movie in their imagination? Did they find some of Nanny's secret videos and not tell anyone about it? If that's the case, then I can understand why that's a secret that they don't want to share with anyone. Do you know which animated film has so far won the most Oscars? Well, to answer that question, let me give you another animation fact. There is no such thing as an animated film that won 3 Oscars or more. Yes, so far, the most Oscars that an animated feature has received is just 2. And there is an entire list of films that got that achievement. These include Pinocchio, Fantasia, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, The Incredibles, Up, Toy Story 3, Frozen, Coco, and Soul. Also, notice how in that entire list, all of these films are either from Disney or Pixar. Yes, there have been some non-Disney animated features that won an Oscar, but so far none of them have gotten more than 1. I'm not saying this is Disney's fault here, but it does show how much the Academy cares about animation. I don't know about you, but as an animation fan, now I know how Chris Rock felt. You want to know something else about the Oscars? Out of all the categories in the Academy Awards, and not counting any of the honorary awards or special achievement awards, animated films have only won in 3 categories. Yes, they would get nominations in several categories, including Best Picture, but the only wins that they got were just in 3. Of course, there's Best Animated Feature, then there is Best Original Song, and Best Original Score. That's it. On a side note, The Prince of Egypt is the only non-Disney animated feature to ever win an Oscar outside of Best Animated Picture. And The Incredibles is noted to be the only animated feature so far to win an Oscar outside of those 3 categories, where not only did it win Best Animated Feature, but it also won for Best Sound Editing. I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a pattern going on. And they all lead to the same conclusion that the Academy just doesn't care about animation. Or at least, not enough to give them the credit that they deserve. As expected, after all the wins that it got from other awards, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio finally won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. But did you know that this win comes with some historical significance? After being nominated for several years in a row since Klaus, this is the first time that Netflix finally won an Oscar in the category. This is also the first time since Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit that a stop-motion animated film won an Oscar in the category, which also makes it the second stop-motion film to ever win an Oscar for Best Animated Feature. And most importantly, Guillermo del Toro is the first person ever to have an Oscar for both Best Animated Feature and Best Picture. Not at the same time, of course, but still an admirable record worth noting. Congratulations to the entire Pinocchio team for the movie itself and all the wins that it got. Bikini Bottom from SpongeBob SquarePants is one of the most popular locations in cartoon history, right up there with Springfield, Quahog, Bedrock, and South Park. It's so popular that every resident living in the city is recognizable. But do you know who is the most popular fish in Bikini Bottom? And I don't mean any of the main characters in SpongeBob. I mean the most popular random fish who mainly shows up in the background. Well, after doing some research, I was surprised to find that it's actually this guy. As of 2023, this guy has so far appeared in over 190 episodes of SpongeBob. Not far behind in second place is this guy, whom fans know as Fred. He has appeared in so far over 170 episodes. This is largely thanks to how he is associated with the popular running gag, My Leg. And in third place, it goes to this guy, who has so far appeared in over 140 episodes. You may know him more for being a little more cranky, including commenting on Mr. Krabs' big meaty claws in Bang Geeks. It goes to show that there are no small parts, only small fishes just living their life in Bikini Bottom. If you know your Disney history, then you know that Walt Disney was the first voice of Mickey Mouse. He did so all the way up to 1947, where after Fun and Fancy Free, He retired from the role because he was getting increasingly busy, and the quality of his voice was getting increasingly damaged due to his chain-smoking habit. However, Fun and Fancy Free was not the last time that Walt Disney voiced Mickey Mouse. That would actually be the Mickey Mouse Club. During the animated segments where Mickey himself would greet the guests, Walt Disney himself temporarily came out of that retirement to voice Mickey once again. However, need I remind you again that part of the reason why he stopped voicing Mickey Mouse was because after the years of continuously smoking, now he starts to sound like a smoker. And as a result, well, let's just say that he sounds a little different than before.
Oh boy! Whoa, steady! Whoa! Hi, Musketeers.
Hi, Mickey!
Well, here we go again. So hang on. Anything goes. You ready?
Ready!
Then let the show begin.
I mean, he did try, but listening to that, Mickey, is just a reminder of why you should never smoke. I know many of you are as excited as I am for the release of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. But did you know that this is not the first time that Mario entered the world of animation? You're probably familiar with the animated shows by DiC back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, including the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. But that one is actually not Mario's first time. Back in 1986, Japan released a movie called The Super Mario Bros. The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach, which is also noted to be one of the first ever animated movies to be based on a video game. But even that is not the first time that Mario appeared in a cartoon. That title belongs to the 1983 animated anthology series Saturday Supercade by Ruby Spears Productions. One of the segments was based on the arcade game Donkey Kong, where Mario and Pauline try to capture the gorilla after he escaped the circus. And that is where you find Mario's first animated appearance, to which he was voiced by Peter Cullen.
Give it up, Donkey Kong. I'm used to your tricks.
After watching this movie, it inspired me to go and check out all the interesting trivia about it. So here are 5 fascinating facts about The Land Before Time. The original concept that Don Bluth and Steven Spielberg thought up for this movie was that this was going to be Bambi, but with dinosaurs. Originally, all the dinosaurs would have been mute, but it was decided later on to make the dinosaurs talk so that the movie can be more appealing to children. Out of all the characters in the original, Rooter is the only one who does not show up in any of the sequels in any way. The original running time for this film was 80 to 82 minutes, but they had to cut it down to 69 because there were some scenes that were going on for way too long, and others felt like they were way too intense for children. And finally, out of all the movies in the franchise, the first is the only one that is not a musical. If you're a fan of Lilo and Stitch, then there's a good chance that you know that throughout the years, Stitch doesn't just hang out with Lilo. Throughout Stitch's history, there have been several different TV shows from different countries in which Stitch hangs out with a different little girl in an entirely different place. There was the anime where Stitch was in Japan, and there was the Chinese animated series where Stitch found himself in China. But the weirdest place that Stitch found himself in is not anywhere in animation. It's actually in a manga. And no, I'm not talking about the one that is a spin-off to the anime. I'm talking about the one that he hangs out with a samurai. Yes, the manga is called Tono and Stitch, and the premise is that instead of Stitch crash landing in modern Hawaii, Stitch would crash land in Sengoku-era Japan. And the samurai warlord who first discovers him gradually grows a bond throughout the volumes. And of course, a big part of it is because he loves Stitch's chaotic charm and even refers to him as the Blue Tanuki. On a side note, apparently the only Stitch characters that do appear in the manga outside of Stitch himself is Leroy from Leroy and Stitch, making it his first ever appearance after his debut. And on top of that, Dr. Hamsterville himself also made a quick appearance. The manga series was published in 2020 in Japan, but it did get localized and it was released in America a year later under the title of Stitch and the Samurai. Considering the little ball of chaos that Stitch is, the fact that he hung out with a samurai in ancient Japan is something that I feel like is surprising, but shouldn't be surprising at the same time. Tinkerbell is undeniably one of the most famous characters in the Magic Kingdom next to Mickey Mouse. But did you know how Tinkerbell became a major Disney icon? Some are probably gonna say that it's because of the movie where she's from, but in actuality, it's because of television. When Disney was developing the Disneyland show in the early 1950s, executives were worried that the show would be a major risk and that there would be a chance that it would fail. They also knew that the show needed a cartoon host, but they didn't want to use either Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck in fear that if this would fail, then it would leave a stain to their legacy. So in that case, who would they get instead? Their answer came when their latest animated movie at the time, Peter Pan, was released, and discovered that Tinker Bell was their answer. Not only because she was proven to be popular amongst audiences, but also because she was too new to have a legacy like Mickey Mouse. So if the series failed, then the risks would be minimal. However, the show turned out to be a tremendous hit. And since then, the company turned it into a tradition for Tinkerbell to use her pixie dust to start Disney shows, thus turning Tinkerbell into the Disney legend we know today. I am right here at the Star Wars launch bay in Disney's Hollywood Studios at Walt Disney World. And what guests may not know as they're coming in and coming out of that place is that once upon a time, this used to be a fully functioning animation studio. The place was called the Magic of Disney Animation. And not only was it a place where guests could learn about how Disney would go and make their animated films, but there was also another part of it that actually did serve as a legitimate animation studio where they would go and create actual pieces of animation. Now, at the start, when they would go and begin this, around the same time when they would open with Disney's Hollywood Studios, that used to be called Disney's MGM Studios, but that's another story, they would begin by making Roger Rabbit cartoons, and they helped out by creating some animations for some of Disney's biggest animated films at the time, like The Little Mermaid, I believe, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and Aladdin. But at the same time, a little bit later, in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, they would go and actually make entire animated features over there. That place is where they actually created Mulan, Lilo and Stitch, and Brother Bear. Now, sadly, it was not long after Brother Bear in 2003 when the animation studio side closed down, when Disney was changing things up in terms of their animation division. And in 2015, the entirety of the Magic of Disney Animation had to shut down in favor of turning it into what it is now with the Star Wars launch bay. It's kind of funny to go and mention because considering that we are at Walt Disney World and this is a place where guests could come in and come out and meet up with Star Wars characters, it's funny that not many people know that what they are walking into is actually a significant piece of both Disney animation and animation history. As the old saying goes, one person's trash is another's treasure. And in the world of animation, one of the best examples of that is Adventure Time. Because believe it or not, it was very close to becoming a Nickelodeon show. Back in the mid-2000s, Penn Ward created Adventure Time as an animated short with the help of Frederator Studios. The short was then aired on Nickelodeon at the beginning of 2007, and right afterwards became a viral sensation on the internet. So much so that it aired on Nick once again a year later at the end of 2008 as part of the anthology show Random Cartoons. Obviously, Nickelodeon loved the results of the short, but they didn't love it enough to turn it into a full series, even if they were asked to do so 5 times. So then, when the rights to commission this as a full series expired, that's when Cartoon Network stepped in to give Adventure Time a chance to actually become a series. And the rest, well, let's just say that their time with the show speaks for itself. We all know what this logo is. But do you know who is in this logo? Back in 1994, when DreamWorks was created, Steven Spielberg wanted to have a logo for his new company that would be reminiscent to the golden age of Hollywood. With the help of Industrial Lights and Magic, Robert Hunt was hired to go and create a hand-drawn piece for the logo. The idea that Spielberg had in mind was a person fishing on the moon. Hunt decided to take one step further, where he decided that the person would be a little boy, and he brought in his own son William to be the model. From there, throughout the years, DreamWorks became more and more synonymous with its animation studio, and the Moon Boy was getting more notoriety as the company's mascot, especially when we see many different variants of that logo before movies like Shrek, Madagascar, and Kung Fu Panda. But But then at the end of 2022, with the release of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, not only did the logo get a significant update to highlight the studio's legacy, but they also updated the kid where he went from a moon boy to a moon child, where they sacrificed the idea that the kid has a gender so that everyone who is watching the movie can see themselves in the child. And now that the kid is known as a recognizable icon, there's just one question I have to ask. When are we gonna have the Moonchild movie? After years of waiting, the live-action remake of The Little Mermaid is finally part of our world. And what many people are excited the most is to see Halle Bailey sing as Ariel, and to be the first African-American woman to play as the Disney mermaid in a major production. But did you know that this is not the first time that a woman of color played Ariel? And I don't mean in a little local show, I mean in an official Disney production. There was the series Once Upon a Time where they had a Hispanic Ariel, played by Joanna Garcia Swisher. Then a few years later there was the national tour of the Broadway show, to which they had an Asian Ariel, played by Diana Huey. And then for the 30th anniversary live television special, they had a Polynesian Ariel, played by the voice of Moana, Auli Cravalho. So if Ariel was already portrayed by different ethnicities, I don't see the problem with having a black Ariel. It's time to travel into different universes because one of the most anticipated sequels has been finally released. And even before it came out, Across the Spider-Verse has already broken a significant record. You see, the first movie, Into the Spider-Verse, held the record for the most amount of people working on an animated film with over 800 different artists and animators. Why do I bring this up? Because the record has been officially broken by its sequel. Yes, Across the Spider-Verse managed to top that by hiring over 1,000 animators to work on the movie. And they certainly need as much of those people as they can, especially when they're all developing 6 distinctly different universes and 240 individual characters, all in this one movie alone. So not only is the hype for this movie big, but so is the scale of the feature and the amount of resources that they needed to use. Miles better deliver big for Sony on this one because there's a lot more than just all the Spider-Mans that are on the line on this. We all know Bugs Bunny as one of the most popular cartoon characters in history, which by default makes Bugs the most popular gender-fluid trans cartoon character in history. Oh, you don't know about this? Well, you should, considering that it's canon. In the 1990s, one of the legendary Looney Tunes directors, Chuck Jones, stated in one of his books that Bugs does not have a set gender, considering that part of their inspiration is the tricksters in Norse mythology, whom all of them are gender fluid. As for the trans part, the trans community in the 1980s often used Bugs as their icon. When Chuck Jones saw that, he thought it was cool and decided to make that a part of their character. But let's be honest here, we didn't need confirmation from Jones to know that fact. Come on, Bugs has on record kissed more guys while dressed up as women, more so than they did looking like a male and kissing women. All you have to do is just watch a handful of their cartoons, and that should be enough to tell you that Bugs is unapologetically straight as a circle. It's always an exciting time when Pixar releases a brand new animated feature, and in the case of Elemental, none could be more excited than director Peter Sohn, whom I can guarantee you have heard of before, and I'm not talking about his name. On top of being a Pixar veteran, Peter Sohn has occasionally been a voice actor for some of their movies. His first credit was being a mugger in The Incredibles, then his voice got massive recognition when he voiced Emile from Ratatouille, and from there he would also be the voice of Squishy from Monsters University, Forrest Woodbush from The Good Dinosaur, Sissio from Luca, and Socks from Lightyear. Outside of Pixar, he was also the voice of Ganke Lee from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but unfortunately his lines were deleted in the final film. But the good news is that he did get his chance to talk in Across the Spider-Verse. That's what I meant when I said that you have heard of him. Or maybe I should have said that you've heard him before. I never thought that I would make an update about one of my previous animation fact videos, but here we are. Do you remember when I talked about El Macho from Despicable Me 2? And how he was almost voiced by Al Pacino before he bailed out at the last minute? Well, it turns out that those recordings were recently discovered. Or at least a little part of it. It was found on the demo of animator Patrick Pujalt, where he showcased some of the character animation that he has done for the first and second Despicable Me film and for the Lorax. One of the clips he showcased was a small scene featuring El Macho with Al Pacino's voice. And when you compare what Pacino did with Benjamin Bratt, you'll find that the differences are, quite noticeable.
I have you now!
I am
I never thought that we would actually see the day, but we are finally gonna have our opportunity to watch Nimona, as this is the final animated feature produced by Blue Sky Studios. And yes, I do mean this Blue Sky, who is sadly no longer with us. The entire production began back in 2015, when Fox received the film rights to the graphic novel so that they could go and turn that into an animated film. Over the years, Blue Sky Studios would be hard at work in order to produce the movie, but then things got difficult when Disney acquired Fox in 2019, and the executives were making some pretty picky demands that would have really changed the dynamic of the feature. But then sadly in 2021, Disney announced that they would go and fully shut down Blue Sky Studios, leaving the project to be cancelled when it was about 75% complete. It wasn't until the following year in April of 2022 when Annapurna Pictures stepped in to save the production and give the movie a Netflix release, as well as hiring D-Neg Animation to finish up the visuals, which ultimately led to its grand release in the summer of 2023. It really goes to show that not even taking down an entire animation studio is enough to stop Nimona's chaotic energy. A recent article revealed that despite the movie being highly praised, the making of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was an absolute nightmare. And those responsible are unfortunately the same guys who get the most credit for Spider-Verse, Phil Lord and Chris Miller. According to 4 anonymous animators who worked on the sequel, those two caused the production to become a toxic work environment. So you know when making movies, whenever there's a need to go and change things in the story, that's mostly reserved for the pre-production so that only the writers, the editors, and the story artists would go and handle that. However, when Phil Lord wants to do a story change, he makes it everyone's problem. He demands that every scene must be fully animated from start to finish, and only then does Phil determine if a scene is good or not for the final film. Which, more so than it doesn't, he throws all that hard work in the trash. In fact, it has happened that the animators had to fully develop a scene up to 5 times in a row just so that it could have Phil Lord's approval. And what's even worse is that Lord is one of those people that can never stick with one idea. So even if there was a scene that Lord approved, he would change up the script the next day, and that approved scene has become a complete waste. In fact, that case can be so bad, there was a period of 3 to 6 months where Lord was really changing things up with the story. All the animators were literally sitting there doing nothing. As for Chris Miller, the animators don't have much to say about him, mainly because he was almost never there. The animators said that the only time Chris ever stepped in as a producer was during the last 2 months of production. I'm sure he was busy doing something, but I'm sure the grand majority of the time was not related to Across the Spider-Verse. And as a result, this type of work ethic caused the animators to have some negative consequences, where they are left always overworked, continuously burned out, and completely demotivated. Especially when they had to work 11 hours a day, 7 days a week, and an average of 70 hours per week. Also, while there were over 1,000 people who worked on the movie, over 100 of them quit because they couldn't handle the toxicity. And the worst thing about all this? This didn't just happen during Across the Spider-Verse. That's just how Lord and Miller make movies. This toxic work environment was also found in the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs films, the Lego movies, the Mitchells vs. the Machines, and the Spider-Verse films. In fact, not only was this the reason why Lucasfilm fired Lord and Miller from the Han Solo movie, but it's also the reason why Across the Spider-Verse was delayed by over a year. I won't deny that Lord and Miller are talented filmmakers, but with how they completely exploit their animators, it's amazing how they could be both so talented, yet so incompetent at the same time. For the first time since 1960, actors have joined writers in one of the biggest strikes in Hollywood history, making several demands for their rights in their respective occupations, including better wages so that they could at least afford having a home and buying groceries, and job security so that their livelihoods are not threatened by AI. Not to mention for studios to stop removing content that's exclusive to streaming, because they're also taking away a lot of people's residuals. But some might be wondering, what are the consequences of this strike? How is this going to affect Hollywood and especially your entertainment? Well, first off, almost all productions have been put on hold. With no actors and no writers, there's no way to make progress on any major projects. And yes, this doesn't just affect live-action productions, but animated movies and series as well. Meaning that the majority of projects that were scheduled for 2024 and 2025 are going to be delayed. There will be a few productions that will try to work around the strike by hiring body doubles or even using AI, but I'll tell you now that they're gonna learn the hard way that those are not good alternatives. Also, because of the strike, most celebrities are not going to attend any major events, especially for the purpose of promoting any new projects that they're in. The events are technically still going to happen, but they're going to be a lot more awkward without any celebrities. So it's going to be weird to see them not show up at any red carpet premieres, conventions like Comic-Con, press tours, or film festivals. So you can imagine how major events like the San Diego Comic-Con or the Toronto Film Festival is pretty much panicking right now. And it's also worth noting that there is a chance that studios will try to find a way to produce content without the need of actors and writers. And the quickest solution to that is by making more unscripted content. So don't be surprised if you end up seeing a lot more new reality shows than usual. So to make a long story short of how Hollywood is going to be during the big strike, you remember how bad they were hit back in 2020 because of the pandemic? It's going to be kind of like that. It can happen when the production of a movie can jump from one animation studio to another. While these moments are rare, it's not impossible that an animation studio would pick up something that another left off. In fact, we recently just saw that with Nimona going from Blue Sky to Annapurna. But one great example of that is Sony's Vivo, which was originally a DreamWorks movie. Back in 2009, after the huge success of In the Heights, Lin-Manuel Miranda started work on the film, and soon teamed up with DreamWorks Animation in order to bring this entire feature to life. However, it ultimately fell apart at the beginning of 2015, when financial troubles caused DreamWorks Animation to go and downsize, thus canceling several projects, including Vivo. However, Miranda was not ready to give up on his dream project. In 2016, after the massive success he had with Hamilton, Miranda teamed up with Sony Pictures Animation in order to bring the project back to life. And after a few years of getting the movie back on track, Vivo finally got its chance on the spotlight on August of 2021 on Netflix. I personally really like this story because much like Vivo himself, who had to go on this big journey from the Havana to Miami, the production itself went on a similar journey going from DreamWorks to Sony. South Park is both one of the edgiest and one of the most celebrated shows on television. But as we all know, this edginess often gets them into a lot of trouble. And that is especially the case with some Muslims. One of the biggest sins that you can ever commit in the Islam religion is to show a depiction of the Prophet Muhammad. But you know South Park, they look at that rule and just say, whatever, I get to do what I want! And thus, in the Season 5 episode called Super Best Friends, one of the heroes of the group alongside the other religious figures is indeed the Prophet Muhammad. As a result, not only did Muslims get massively upset over the episode, but the show's creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, ended up getting a lot of messages from them that they would, well, you know. And you know what's the craziest thing about that? That didn't stop them from wanting to show Muhammad. In the episode Cartoon Wars Part 1 and 2, 200 and 201, they would keep on teasing that they would show the Prophet Muhammad again, which continued the cycle of more angry Muslims and more messages of and this is exactly why to this day, all 5 of those episodes have either been heavily censored or just flat out banned entirely. And considering that we are talking about South Park, this is only the tip of the iceberg of their controversies. With Mutant Mayhem coming out of its shell, people have been talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles again. But of course, with the internet being the internet, some discussions can get sour very quickly. And that is definitely the case with April O'Neil, who not only looks nothing like the white redhead that everybody simps for, but especially the fact that she is black. But it does raise the question, what was April O'Neil's original race? And the answer to that is, who the fridge knows? Even the creators are pretty mixed up about it. While she was originally intended to be Asian, Peter Laird always envisioned her as white of English descent. But according to Kevin Eastman, he named April after his then girlfriend, who is of mixed race and part of that is black. Which is why Eastman said that April O'Neil is also of mixed race. So nobody can accuse people of race swapping April O'Neil, because she's been doing that since the very beginning. Did you know that there is an environmental message in SpongeBob SquarePants? And this isn't anything new that they're doing in the recent episodes. This is something that they have done since the very beginning of the show. And I can guarantee that you saw this without even knowing it. So you know how the homes in Bikini Bottom always have a particular shape? You know, like a pineapple, a tiki head, a rock, an anchor, or whatever. And you know how most of the other homes in Bikini Bottom are these metallic things? Well, believe it or not, those are actually car mufflers that were thrown down to the bottom of the ocean because of pollution. And just like fish in real life, it may mess up their ecosystem, but the only thing they can do is just make the most out of it and turn it into their shelters. I mean, considering that we are talking about a show set in the ocean filled with aquatic life, there's gotta be some kind of environmental awareness somewhere. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is debatably the greatest crossover in cinema history, especially with many classic cartoon characters that you would never expect that they would come together in one screen. But did you know that not all the characters accepted the invite? There are actually a handful of cartoons that the filmmakers were not able to get because they were not able to get the rights for their appearance. These include the cast of Popeye, Tom and Jerry, Little Lulu, the Terrytoons characters, and Casper. In fact, that was part of the reason why they had to delete the Marvin Acme funeral scene, since certain characters like Popeye, Bluto, and Casper were required to be there. That, and what was required to mix the live action and animation, was considered to be way too complicated. Which is honestly too bad, because before it was deleted, this was considered to be Steven Spielberg's favorite scene of the movie.
Aw, poor fella.
Yeah, ain't I a stinker?
Everyone loves a good parody, but there are some parodies that can be so good, they could set a brand new standard to what they were parodying. And the best example of that is Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. When director Chuck Jones and writer Mike Maltese created the characters in 1948, they wanted to make a parody of those classic cat and mouse chase cartoons like Tom and Jerry, and really make all those failed attempts of trying to catch the Roadrunner over the top, especially with all those Acme gadgets that the Coyote ordered. But after their debut in 1949 with the short, Fast, and the Furriest, the cartoons became a sensation, even getting an Oscar nomination with the short Be Prepared. And since then, the Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner shorts are some of the most prominent examples of chase cartoons. And on a side note, in the 1960s, Chuck Jones went on to create cartoons for the characters that he parodied, Tom and Jerry, to which in theory sounds like the perfect formula, but in practice? Many people say that inspiration can come from the most unexpected places. And the best example of that is one of the biggest festivals in Buffalo, New York, where the inspiration of the event is none other than Osmosis Jones. Yeah, you remember that movie, right? In one scene of the movie, Bill Murray was excited to bring his daughter to a certain event.
Buffalo, New York. The Buffalo Wing Festival this weekend.
Oh. Yeah, great.
But here's the thing. In real life, there's no such thing as a Buffalo Wings Festival. This is where a man named Drew Cerza comes in, where he saw the movie back in 2001 and asked himself, wait a minute, why the fridge doesn't Buffalo actually have a Buffalo Wings Festival? So the following year in 2002, Cerza and his community got together to create the National Buffalo Wing Festival, which went on to become a major event that happens every year during Labor Day. And not only have over 1 million people attended the event, but people have eaten over 200 tons of chicken wings during that time. Especially when they have some very competitive chicken wing eating contests. So to remind you again about the moral of this story, true inspiration can come from the most unexpected places, even if it's from Bill Murray and his cartoony innards. You may remember the article that talked about how making Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was a nightmare for the animators. And the two responsible for the toxic work environment were Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who not only practice a dangerous work ethic on that movie, but that's just how they make virtually all their films. Well, guess what? We got an update on that controversy. In an interview with Variety, Phil Lord and Chris Miller were asked if they would like to address the criticisms regarding the working conditions of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. This is what Phil Lord had to say. In terms of Spider-Verse, that was a really hard movie to make. We're really proud of how hard everybody worked, and it was very demanding. But we're just really proud of the crew and everything they put into it. What the hell is this? Is that it? No apology? No acknowledgement on the flaws of your work ethic? No realization that your animators shouldn't have gone through that? This is worthless! You've been called out for constantly overworking your animators, and the best response you could think of is just a simple proud of you message? What do you think this is, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs? Did you really think you could solve your problems just by saying I'm proud of you as if it's going to make everything better? It's crazy how they're saying that they care about labor unions and workers' rights, yet the way that they treat their animators is part of the problem. They might as well just admit that they don't care about the well-beings of their employees. Listen, if you want to prove that you actually care about the rights of people working in the entertainment industry, then stop treating your workers like paper by overworking them. Everyone knows Donald Duck as one of Disney's biggest cartoon stars. But I sadly cannot say the same about his long-lost friend. Of course, I'm not talking about either Mickey or Goofy. Who I am talking about is Donald's original pal before he became famous. This is Peter Pig. He made his debut simultaneously with Donald Duck in the 1934 Silly Symphony short The Wise Little Hen, where he would have the same role as Donald, where he didn't want to help out the hen, and just like the duck, you could barely understand a single word he's saying. However, after the short, Disney wanted to experiment more with the duck and have him appear in a few more cartoons like Orphans' Benefits and The Band Concert, to which they slowly discovered the duck's signature personality. And not only were those two cartoons a hit, but they made Donald to be the superstar we know him today. As for Peter Pig, the only other prominent appearance he had was in The Band Concert, where he had a much smaller role than Donald as one of the band members, and then just virtually disappeared since. Yes, it is a bit of a tragic tale, but Disney only has room for one nearly incomprehensible character for their cast. Seriously, it took me a while to understand what the fridge he was saying.